Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 342 of Humanity Rising on this 19th day of October. I want to welcome you in the spirit of humanity rising during these turbulent times of ours. I want to welcome you in the spirit of the future. We're going to be contemplating aspects of the human future today as we look at a very fundamental category of what it means to be human. We have this notion that human beings are mortal, and according to the biblical tradition, literally designed and ordained by God to live no more than 120 years. Well, we're going to look at that phenomenon and characteristic of human beingness today in a contemplation of longevity, and how science now is really pushing the boundaries of who we are and what we are, and how we can evolve beyond previous expectations. Before we jump into that discussion, let us pause, as we always do as we begin Humanity Rising, and just center ourselves in our bodies. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and attune yourself with your heart. Listen to your heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that we're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Even with sometimes musical glitches, it's always good to center ourselves in our hearts and be grateful that we're alive. This moment is ephemeral, and then it's gone. And when it's gone, we enter into another domain for sure, and we're remembered by those who knew us and loved us and had relationships with us. But this human yearning for the eternal, this bursting within us as finite beings for that which is infinite, I think in some ways is what gives rise to our spirituality and gives rise to our religious cosmologies, our religious doctrines. As finite beings, we're aware that we're in something vast and cosmically infinite, but we're limited by time, by space, by longevity. So we're going to look at that today with Dr. Todd Ovokaitys. He's been on the Humanity Rising program, I think 3 times before, so that you'll all know Todd. He studied medicine at Johns Hopkins and Georgetown universities, was brilliant in his class, then moved to California, where he began to explore the domains at the frontier of medicine and science and human well-being, and has developed a interdimensional laser-based platform, has developed sound therapies, has developed techniques for discerning the psychosomatic ailments that plague all of us, with a view of developing technologies that can enhance not only human well-being, but human lifespan at a time when we're kind of settling into men and women sort of being in their 70s somewhere, with more and more people living longer. So Todd, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising. And the purpose of this session, everyone, is a follow-on to his session a month or so ago, where he was talking about all the research that he's been engaging in and has been taking place around the world, because there's a lot of scientists, a lot of companies that are involved in the pushing the boundaries of aging, and not only slowing aging, but reversing aging. And Todd Ovokaitys is right in the middle of that mix. And there was lots of questions. We didn't get to them because of time, so we're going to circle back. So Todd, welcome. And I suggest we start with just a summary of what you indicated last time in terms of the research that's being undertaken, the possibilities that are now being explored, and in particular, your piece, your niche in this larger endeavor to improve human life and extend our duration on this beautiful planet Earth.
Excellent. Well, great to see you again this morning, Jim. A pleasure as always. And I'll aim to just do a little encapsulation, because it's really a multidimensional answer. And we have hard data that fits into that multidimensionality, which maybe is 2D. And the core of it, and then I'll put the layers onto it, is the work that we're doing with an extraordinary type of stem cell that's been controversial till recently, called a V cell. And the extraordinary results that we're seeing is that these cells, which go to sleep when we're born and remain one day old and have the capacity to regenerate or replace every cell in our body, as you say, we have an interdimensional laser technology, and we use a type of frequency modulation to awaken these sleeping cells. And once we do, it's like you'd save your cord blood your whole life, and newborn baby cells are regenerating everything from head to toe. And the most profound effect we've seen is actually reversing biologic age at the DNA level itself. And in this whole area of regeneration medicine, there's an idea of what you might call the escape velocity or the event horizon. And the idea is, if there is a modality where in 1 year you can regenerate someone to be more than 1 year younger, you can get to a point that you can extend the human lifespan essentially indefinitely. And not just extend it, but maintain a youthful body at the same time, while you stay in a young body for a long time with a consciousness of greater and greater wisdom. So our data has already met that mark. So even with the data we now have, even before we add other adjuncts to make it better, if you did one of these protocols every year, you would gradually get younger rather than older if the results of the treatments remain the same with repeated treatments, which is what we're going to study in the near future.
So let me, just so I'm clear, so at birth, the little baby has, trillions of cells that it's that are living and changing and aging and dying, but every human at birth also has a certain subset of cells that don't age.
Correct.
And where are those kept? Are they in every cell? Or are they in the, where would you find those? I mean, how do you find them in the body? I mean, how does one find those, where those cells are that never age?
Well, let's just say the creator makes it as easy as possible because they circulate in blood.
Really?
Yes. So to get these cells, all we need to do is draw 6 tubes of blood, and we achieve much greater numbers than other labs have reported. We get roughly 50 million cells from 6 tubes of blood, which is more than enough to do a powerful regeneration treatment with these cells that are literally frozen in time. For unknown reasons, these cells go into hibernation when we're born. If cells are hibernating, they're not metabolically active, they're not dividing, which means their telomeres aren't shortening, their other DNA aging clocks aren't ticking, like the methylation system, where you have the so-called epigenetic methylation loci in DNA, which is how biologic age is tested most efficiently. And no matter how old someone is, whether they're a newborn or 5 or 50 or 110, these cells retain their one-day-old characteristics, and they retain their numbers throughout life as well, so they don't diminish.
Remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
Remarkable. When was that discovered? Was that something you figured out, or that must be a recent discovery?
It's quite recent. It was only in 2006 that this type of stem cell was discovered in mice. And then shortly thereafter, it was discovered in humans and other mammals as well. And the early pioneer, and still a leading pioneer, is a Dr. Radicek from the University of Kentucky in Louisville, who wrote a lot about these cells, did extensive in vitro and animal studies, and then was actually in the hot seat with controversy because some scientists disputed that these cells even existed. I think we're past that now. People believe they exist.
So the basic theory is that you take these cells that have been just hibernating and therefore are fresh, and you can replace different, like if you have a bad kidney or you have a bad heart, you could use these cells to regrow fresh organs, if you will, or parts of the body. Is that correct?
It's even more efficient than that. So
why am I not surprised? Nature's always more efficient than the human mind.
So we did a study in Eastern Europe with the support of the Armenian government. And this addresses your point about how these cells might go through the body and take an organ that has had some wear and tear and put it into a younger state or younger condition. And the second part of it is we don't just awaken these cells. That's the first step, and that's critically important. They won't do anything unless they come out of hibernation. And when they do, the aspect that's very interesting, the full name of the cell is very small embryonic-like stem cell. So embryonic-like means they're just past embryonic, and they're incredibly powerful. They can become all the types of cells of the 3 germ layers, as you recall, endoderm, the mesoderm, and ectoderm, which means they can essentially become any type of cell in the body. And the other part that's important is that they're very small, because if you give cells intravenously, as you know by the circulation, the first place they go is the right side of the heart and then to the lung. And most other types of stem cells are too big to get through the lung. For example, stem cells derived from fat called mesenchymal stem cells, they're popularly used, but their size is 12 to 30 microns. Pulmonary capillaries on average are about 6 microns, so it's hard to fit a 12 micron ball through a 6 micron tube. whereas the V cells are typically 2 to 5 microns, so they can easily pass through, which means they're small enough to get everywhere in the body from head to toe. And then the second part of it, which makes it more efficient, is that the same laser that we use to awaken through the photoacoustic process has been engineered so it has much greater depth of penetration than ordinary laser. So we use frequencies in the red to awaken and direct these cells. And normally that wavelength wouldn't go more than about 5 millimeters through tissue in a coherent way. And based on what we've patented through our physicist who gave the description of the physics behind it, we believe we get the signal at least 10 to 20 times deeper than that. And there's part of the signal that probably goes all the way through the body from one side to the other. And where we direct that signal, it's like a homing call, because we've shown that if we do that in a flask of cells, the cells will tend to go where the beam is and to stick to each other. So what we believe we're doing is increasing the probability that a stem cell goes in the body three-dimensionally where we want it to go. So when you mentioned working with the heart, we, in this study, gave the cells intravenously and then used this interdimensional laser to direct them to the heart. And it was only 5 minutes from the anterior aspect and 5 minutes from the lateral aspect. And the results in regeneration were pretty astonishing. So if you want, I'll share that data with you.
Sure, if you'd like.
So the comparison was that there had recently been published a so-called meta-analysis. And what that means is they gather multiple published studies and just summarize all the data and do statistics on it. This meta-analysis looked at nearly 1,500 people that had stem cells directly injected into their coronary arteries by cardiac catheterization. And that's very invasive and requires putting literally a little tube right in the arteries that supply the heart.
Wow.
And the result of that aggressive procedure was roughly an 8% improvement in function after 6 months. Our procedure, which was intravenous, not intracoronary, much, much safer, clearly, and how you say, very efficient, non-invasive, that instead of an 8% improvement at 6 months, giving the cells IV and the laser guidance, 5 minutes each direction, we saw 14% in just 3 days, which is already statistically significant, which at 1 month had improved to 25%. At 2 months, it was 37% better. At 6 months, it was 50% better. We had 2 of the subjects that improved almost to normal cardiac function with a single intravenous treatment.
Wow. That's quite extraordinary.
Right. So there's 2 parts. The first is awakening the cells, and the second is using this advanced physics of laser waveforms to create a signal that also increases the probability that the cells go and stick where we want them to go.
Gotcha. So you activate them and then put it in intravenously and then use laser to guide them to the heart in this case.
Correct.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've got some questions, Todd, that came in. A woman, Catherine Alexander, is asking about essentially about epigenetics in this whole domain and how a person's attitude and disposition of being can affect the stem cell rejuvenation, and whether the individual himself or herself can actually activate these embryonic stem cells sort of spontaneously in the body, or whether it has to be a scientific procedure. Can you speak to that?
I'd love to speak to that. That's really a very insightful question. Now, a good friend of mine is Dr. Bruce Lipton, who made a splash some years ago with his book, The Biology of Belief, we really began to introduce this notion of epigenetics. And I'm reviewing this in part because not all your listeners may understand the science, so get everybody on the same page. And the basic idea is that while we're born with our genetic code that we get from our mother and father, just because we have our particular genome doesn't mean that it determines who and what we are. The key point of Bruce Lipton's work and others in epigenetics is that our code is malleable. Our code has genes that we can turn on and we can turn off. So even though we might have a symphony of notes that can be played to represent who we are, we don't have to play all those notes all the time. We can turn some on, we can turn some off. And there are epigenetic switches that will be more beneficial to us and those that won't be. So it's been quite extraordinary that research has shown that doing the things we know that are generally great for us, like meditation, like exercise, like intentionality, like thinking in a different way that's more expansive, and also our diet, what and how we eat, depending upon our own genetic structure, all of these factors play a role in which part of the whole genome is being switched on and switched off epigenetically. Now, it's a really interesting question about the V cells, which is there something we can do or think that just turns them on so we don't have to do a procedure? We can just turn them on in ourselves. Well, I think there are people that do that. And when I first learned about the VSCLs and the fact that they go into hibernation when we're born, and for most people, these cells stay asleep. It could have been the cells that regenerated their bodies, kept it younger, and extended their lives. The question was, why don't they awaken? I mean, they're there for some reason. And then it occurred to me that it could be an explanation for so-called biblical longevity. So you probably recall from Genesis 5:27 that Methuselah was said to live to be 969 years old. So at least that's the oldest reported in some document, how long someone has lived. I mean, there are other Eastern systems that suggest some people live even longer, but that said, that's kind of a good place to start. And it occurred to me that if these V cells actually were awakened in a person, that in itself could extend longevity for a very long time, theoretically even hundreds of years. So when I read the Bible, I thought, well, maybe they were saying a month was a year when you calculate it, and it's about like a typical lifespan. And when I had that insight, it may well be the case that they actually lived that long. They were counting the same number of years that we are. And it's a dormant system for very extended longevity, which I believe is going to be a function of consciousness, which I know is a big focus of a university. And that to the degree that people enhance their consciousness state, that they may be more and more able to awaken this intrinsic mechanism of self-regeneration.
Well, it is interesting, that that passage in Genesis around, the Lord God saying we will limit human life to 120 years, that implies that previous to that, there was no limitation.
Right. And that might be the point that the V cells went to sleep, right there at that line in the Bible.
Well, if God created us, then he would certainly know how to do that. So let's talk a little bit more about epigenetics and the relationship between one's disposition and intention along the lines you were just describing, and the activation of longevity and well-being. You know, as you've done the research that you've done, Todd, and as you advise people who come to you from around the world and so forth, how do you advise people to increase their well-being and longevity, assuming they wouldn't necessarily use your specific laser-based technique?
Right. And this really is the second part of the answer to the first question, which is that we not only do the stem cell work, which I really consider the flagship, the core, that's doing a profound, not just anti-aging, but actual age reversal effect, that it works better when you layer it with everything else. So we have diet recommendations that are tailored to that person and their own epigenetics and their own so-called SNP or single nucleotide polymorphisms. And that, of course, is a single nucleotide change in a DNA code can change what amino acid it codes for, and changing even one amino acid can change how that protein functions. So we talk about SNPs or SNPs. So we make diet recommendations, lifestyle recommendations, exercise recommendations. We create a system of nutritional supplementation that's tailored to that person's particular situation. We have 3 that are for general rejuvenation that we tend to give everyone unless they have a sensitivity. And then we adjust others based upon that particular person's physical and physiologic needs. And then we were also into peptide therapy. That's something that I've learned about in the past few years. And I and the 2 other excellent practitioners I work with in my office, we've all learned quite about different peptides and how to use them. So we often incorporate that into someone's program to get even better results. And then there are other layers of age reversal modalities that we may also add on an individual basis. Next year, we're planning to do a larger scale clinical trial, or at least a fairly detailed clinical trial, looking at a number of these variables to see what the actual curves of age reversal are, and we add other adjuncts, how that might further enhance it.
Well, you know, it's such an extraordinary phenomenon, the way the body heals. You know, I've always been completely fascinated by the placebo effect. You know, that you have all the regimens that you're laying out, you know, people can do this and enhance and so forth and so on. But there's many examples of, you know, a person that doesn't exercise, doesn't know much, but thinks that the pill that the doctor gave them is going to cure them, and sure enough, they get cured.
Right.
And so that the effect of belief, you know, the biology of belief, the effect of just simple belief on our bodies is remarkable.
It's really profound. And I recall one of the most amazing pieces of information in my medical training was that up to 2/3 of the pain relieving effect of morphine was just the placebo effect. If someone thought they're being given morphine, it worked almost as well as if they actually got it, if they believed it, which then really is a function of saying how powerful our minds and awareness and belief are, and why don't we cultivate that a bit more?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, that's the human predicament right now around the world. What Joseph Jaworski yesterday, talking about leadership and strategy, says we're all in the grip of what he called institutional conformity. And breaking out of that can be as simple as believing you're really getting the pill, but
Right.
it can also be, a discipline of mind and body, of nutrition, exercise, meditation, intentionality that you cultivate. Although it's always been a mystery to me how people who are doing all the right things that someone like you would prescribe
Right.
make maybe a little bit of progress down the road, and the person that doesn't even know you but thought they got the pill and you're completely cured. How
Well,
do you explain that, sir?
that is a beautiful question. And I believe the answer then gets to another part of the equation, which is what we would call psycho-emotional medicine, which is that all of us have conflicts, stresses, and traumas that have been so big and lived in a state of isolation that they get driven into our unconscious. And they can be ours, or even more complex, it can be that of our ancestors. So we're each a complex of these unresolved issues and conflicts. And in a sense, part of our role in being here is to solve the conflicts for our clans, so we solve it for ourselves and for all the generations to follow. And there is this incredible art that the pioneers in this area, this all began with the work of a Dr. Hammer in Germany. I'm sure you're probably acquainted with the so-called New German medicine. And
No, tell us about it.
oh, really? Seriously?
Yeah, tell us about it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, my ignorance will never cease to amaze you, man.
Well, I'm delighted to share this because it's
Sure, please.
crazy cool stuff. So Dr. Hammer was an oncologist, a cancer doctor in Germany, and he developed cancer himself. So that's got to be a bad deal, right? Because you know how aggressive your treatments are. And it was testicular cancer. And normally you would have had, castration and chemo or radiation or both, depending upon the specifics of his tumor biology. And he had a brilliant insight. And is that he realized that his abnormal growth was probably related to the shock when his 20-year-old son died tragically in an accident. And he made the ingenious connection that the tumor was literally the result of his not having processed the emotion, it having gone unconscious, and literally his brain was trying to make a super testicle to replace the son he'd lost.
Whoa.
So in this world, cancer is not this random cat, I think, trying to kill us. Cancer is usually the body trying to create a super organ to overcome an emotional conflict related metaphorically to that organ. So Dr. Hammer, as an oncologist, then began to ask questions of his other patients. And what he found that was essentially constant, even though people are so very different, that the type of emotional conflict related to a particular type of tumor was very consistent. So if it was a breast tumor, it was about worry over the survival of the children. If it was liver, it was related to the conflict over lack. If it was the stomach, it was about something indigestible. If it was the lung, it was about fear of survival. So there was this psycho-emotional constancy of the stress or trauma related to what type of tumor in the body first would manifest. And then he actually began to resolve cancer literally just by asking the right questions in the right way. And that was somewhat frowned upon by his community, as you can imagine. And his work really was landmark pioneering. He probably should have won a Nobel Prize. It's absolutely brilliant. I think in many ways, the missing piece in the full, complete evolution of what is a more enlightened medicine. He was followed by someone named Claude Sabah, who was a Frenchman. And Sabah took this whole art beyond the oncology world, where Hammer was primarily, at least at the beginning, and expanded it further. He did a lot of work with multiple sclerosis, for example, and assisting to improve people's condition just by getting to the emotional core of it. And now we have two of his students, and Isabelle Benarous, who I had the pleasure of working with yesterday. She's so good and has such a wonderful French accent. And she's evolved the art further to something called bioreprogramming. And also a person named Enrique Boran, who's from Uruguay, another student of Sabah, who does biological decoding. And that literally is astounding. It's the entire psycho-emotional landscape of the body. So over the past 40 years, every bone, every muscle, every artery, every organ, every system has been defined for the specific emotional conflicts that are related to disturbances in them. And part of the work, just like being a medical doctor, is you have to learn the anatomy and the physiology and the pathophysiology. And then once you've learned that and you understand what the conflicts may be for a particular issue, then you have to learn how to decode them. And that's where another level of the art comes in, to understand the right questions to ask in the right way to allow someone to have a backdoor into the psyche of what they've hidden themselves, so they can become aware of it, release the emotion of it, and release the adverse effect it has upon them, for them and their ancestors. Now, Enrique is really the artisan of decoding. If Hammer and Sabah, between them, decoded 500 conditions, he himself has decoded 1,000 additional ones. And with him, we have almost the complete library for almost anything happening in the body, or even in the psychology. There are some very complex sets of conflicts that happen that create different psychological states as well. So he has written the Blue Book of Biological Decoding, which gives many more decodings than there were originally. He's writing a book about decodings for all the various problems of the kidney, which is a very important factor in the decoding process.
There's a quick question here about the kidney. What are the psycho-emotional issues surrounding the kidney ailments?
Well, kidneys are about mother, and they're also about liquid and liquidity. So if someone has a conflict with liquid, like they fell off a boat or they jumped in a pool and they nearly drowned, or it can also be about financial liquidity, like literally drowning financially, or a conflict over mother or metaphoric mother issues. Anything that's in that realm of mother liquidity that is an unconscious, unresolved conflict can affect the kidney. And different subhues of those conflicts affect the kidney in different ways.
Wow. And like, for example, the prostate, which is a ailment of most men, what would be why would the prostate, for example, be something that is affected in almost all men? How would this system explain that phenomenon?
Well, I think when you hear, you're gonna go, oh my God. So the conflict of the prostate is a conflict over a man's legacy. So it could be a conflict over your legacy because your children might have gone astray and not be doing exactly what you want them to do, and they're your heritage in that way. It could be a conflict that your business or your life's work hasn't gone necessarily all the way that you wanted it, or there could be some controversy about your work, or some reputation challenge about your work. And all that affects a person's sense of legacy, which affects the prostate.
Wow, well, that's something that then that cluster of legacy clusters affects almost all men.
Right. Right.
In one way or another.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I've seen, for example, a PSA drop by 50% just with one decoding session, which of course is the level of a prostate marker that goes up as the prostate enlarges. So I've really seen a 50% drop just by getting to the emotional root of why it was a little elevated.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, and a related sort of phenomenon is that, you know, the pervasiveness of breast cancer among women. Mm-hmm. That's something that Gabor Mate's talked a lot about. But in your world and with your colleagues, what would be the cluster that comes together around breast cancer?
Breast cancer is also very interesting, and something that we have worked with even in our training, because a woman came with that issue and requested that she be used as a demonstration model in the class. And the principles, they're really just profound and fascinating. The basic conflict with the breast is a conflict of worry over the survival of your children. And the conflict can be a person's actual child. And in a right-handed woman, that would tend to affect the left breast. Or it can be your metaphoric child. Your partner can be a child. Your business can be your child. The book you're writing can be your child. And if it's the metaphoric child for a right-handed woman, that would present itself in the right breast. And probably almost every woman either has a physical child or at least one or more metaphoric children. It can be the partner, the pet, your friend, your business, your social club. So if there is a concern over the survival of that real or metaphoric child, the purpose of the breast is to provide nutrition to the child to ensure its survival. So in our training about breast cancer, it's really a difference in concept. It's not all these cardiac cells that are trying to kill you. It's your brain trying to make a super breast to make a super nutritious milk so that the child survives.
But something must go wrong because the cancer ends up killing the woman.
Right. So, well, that's because of the other principle in psycho-emotional medicine, is that the brain and unconscious only cares about your survival into the next moment. And the general principle is that if someone has a big shock, lived in isolations where they don't express, they don't speak about it, they don't disburden themselves of the emotion, then the brain does not want to be so overwhelmed with this that all it can do is think about this incident, not sleep, not eat. And in nature, that sort of setup will cause distraction or exhaustion. And throughout millions of years of evolution, it's not lung cancer or hypertension or heart disease that has killed the being, it's been predators. So what gets you killed by a predator is being distracted or exhausted. So the brain in our primal architecture wants to keep us from being in either of those states. So the brain will literally hide that stress in a part of the brain that's coded to the metaphoric experience. And then that part of the brain is literally creating changes in the cells that would be the perceived biological solution to the metaphoric problem. Does that make sense?
I think so. There's certainly some malfunction that happens in that pathway because what the brain is seeking to do ends up killing you.
Right, but the brain is only concerned about you're surviving the next moment, not what might happen 3 or 5 years from now. And there's a progression. So let's use breast cancer as an example, since we started there, to go through the rest of these very interesting principles. And say a woman is really concerned about her real child and she's right-handed, then the stress of that causes the brain to start making more cells to make more milk. And that eventually may become a tumor if she doesn't resolve the emotional conflict. If she gets to the core of the conflict and that dissolves, then the problem can just go away, or at worst, it might just become encysted but never grow anymore. Mm-hmm. If it continues and it starts to grow and she doesn't have the opportunity to get to and relieve the conflict, then it may grow into a mass. Now, in our culture, if it goes into mass, she gets the mammogram, gets a biopsy, and gets a diagnosis of cancer, well, that's another big stress. And in the psycho-emotional system, even at that point, if it's still early, if she got to the core root of the emotional conflict and resolved it, the tumor could regress or encapsulate. Mm-hmm. But the way our medicine works, as you know, once they make a diagnosis, then that sets into effect a whole chain of actions that are based on that diagnosis and all the diagnostic and therapeutic measures that may follow. And action decoding, there is what's called the diagnosis conflict, that in many cases, the biggest stress a person experiences that tends to make things 10 times worse is the diagnosis conflict. Mm. What the doctor, and I'm one of those, what the doctor comes in and tells a person when they don't know that they have anything and they go from a question mark to, oh, well, you have X disease, and this disease has this prognosis that maybe you have 1 year, 3 years, or you have to undergo something that's very harsh to prolong your life. That singular conflict is such a big stress that tends to make everything worse. And so, for example, if that stress causes a person to fear, wow, that's going to be expensive, I won't have enough for my family, it causes a fear of lack, then that would tend to cause the disease to go to the liver. A very wild concept in decoding / psycho-emotional medicine is that a tumor doesn't spread as a function of getting into blood vessels and spreading through the circulation and going somewhere, or spreading through the lymphatic vessels and buzzing around and going somewhere, or even going by direct extension. In psycho-emotional medicine, the concept is that the tumor only spreads where you have another conflict that is related to the organ that it spreads to. So if there is a fear of lack because of all the cost of the procedure, then it goes to the liver. If that information causes you to feel very devalued because you're now a person that has this diagnosis, then it goes to the bone. If it causes a fear of your very survival, then it goes to the lung. If it makes you feel intellectually devalued because I shouldn't have done those things that caused me to have this, then it goes to the brain. And so,
Extraordinary.
right. So the psycho-emotional process is not only to address the issue related to the primary, but also to address the specific different conflicts of the respective places it may have gone to.
That is extraordinary. So that all the way through, it's a psychosomatic phenomenon.
Exactly.
All the way through.
All the way through, start to finish.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. By the way, we have a related question from Catherine Alexander. Again, she says, I believe that the suicide of my son and the lack of respect for my husband is what used my liver cancer. I'm wondering, Dr. Todd, whether you've looked into the impact of frequency on health. That is what cured my liver cancer. So she had some kind of a frequency tonal, or I guess, Catherine, you might want to elaborate on what frequency was in your case. But that brings us to a whole phenomenon that you've spent a lot of time with, and that's the frequency of sound.
Right.
These things.
Sure.
So that there are a number of ways, number of protocols that can be used, given the fact that you have this miasm, the psychosomatic miasm. It can be intention. It could also be something like sound that kind of breaks things up independent of intention. Is that correct?
Sound frequency, the waveform of the intention of your mind, electromagnetic frequency, all of those have had a role. And it's interesting that she raises the question of frequency and in a particular oncologic condition in the body. The work that I now do, I believe I might have shared before, was related to a vision that I had when I moved to California. So I came to a workshop in the use of sound and sound pattern at a place then called the John David Learning Institute. And there I met a medical intuitive that so impressed me that I was at the end of my training, only 3 months to finish all the work I'd done at Georgetown, concluding with my pulmonary fellowship, that inspired me to leave the East Coast, where I probably would have been an academic pulmonologist, and moved to California to learn medical intuition. In this context, I had a meditation practice in the class where I actually, this is running Kundalini in different so-called rainbow colors. At the violet, then I actually went in through a type of wormhole like Jodie Foster in Contact and came to a gateway or portal. And when I went through the portal, I saw a room full of DNA and began to communicate to the pure consciousness of DNA.
Wow.
And the message was that the understanding of science about DNA is correct but incomplete. DNA is, in fact, a massive encyclopedia of how to build all the proteins in the body that make everything work. However, that's not how it's controlled. At the structural level, not only is DNA a double helix that is very popular in our consciousness, to fit all of that length, 6 feet into a 1 micron nucleus, DNA also supercoils. So the double helix creates a coil, and then that bigger string creates a coil, and there can be up to 7 levels of supercoiling within a cell. And the message was that you have coils, and while people think DNA is inert, it actually has been shown that DNA can conduct electricity, it might even be superconducting. So you have this electronic environment of moving charges, you have coils within coils, and essentially you have a type of radio transmission and receiver system that literally all the DNA in the body is continuously sending out radio-like frequency signals to all the other cells. And in addition to the chemical signatures that the cells use to talk to each other, another way the body organizes information is through this frequency communication. And I don't often share this. After that experience and reading James Gleick's book about chaos, the summation of that information was DNA is an iterated function system generating diversity that through three-dimensional spirals creates gradients of vibrational fields that direct cell differentiation and division.
I want to say that again. That was a big mouthful, even for a doctor.
Well, let me explain the one term that people might not be acquainted with, which was iterated function system. And that's a theory of chaos, which means that a simple formula that you repeat over and over can create enormous amounts of complexity. So you see the beautiful fractal images that art is created by a simple formula that gets repeated over and over. That creates the similarity of the appearance as you go up and down the scale of size. So an iterated function system, so it's a simple system. There's only 4 letters in the whole code, but it iterates, and that iterated function system generates diversity, and then structurally through a 3-dimensional spiral system creates gradients of vibrational electromagnetic fields, and that's what instructs the cells of how to differentiate, what to differentiate into, when to regenerate, how to regenerate. And the key point of the whole experience was that if you can learn the vibrational patterns that DNA creates in wellness and in ill health, you will learn how to instruct, and that was the key word, how to instruct an old cell to become young and a sick cell to become healthy. So that's the core of the frequency medicine concept. And I mean, there's a lot we could discuss in that area. Probably most relevant is the work of Raymond Rife, who they say all the way back in the 30s was curing stage 4 cancer just with frequency.
And what was his particular breakthrough or theoretical framework that made him so effective?
Well, Royal R. Rife, like me, studied at Johns Hopkins and then moved to San Diego. An interesting parallel, I thought. And his first invention, which I believe he completed in the late 1920s, was what he called the Rife Universal Microscope. And it was this incredible construction with over 6,000 parts that to a degree use ultraviolet light and quartz prisms in a unique way. And he represented that instead of the usual limits of light microscopy that goes to about 3,000x magnification, that with this system, he was getting to 100,000x magnification, which meant that he could see living bacteria and especially viruses on the screen. Now you can see them with electron microscopy, but the way you have to prepare them basically kills them. But this is different in that these were actually living structures. And then he played frequency until he hit the particular level at which the pathogen shattered like a crystal wine glass when you hit the right note. And this allowed him to compile a series of what he called MORs, or mortal oscillatory resonances. And in his work, because he also had pathological training, he ascertained that in cancer, he always found one or more of 5 different particular pathogens. And if we played all of those frequencies for a particular person, wildly, even in the 1930s, he was reporting reversal of even stage 4 cancer.
Amazing. Amazing.
And so my earliest work really was based on those profound principles.
Mm-hmm.
And there were others. There is the work of Antoine Priori, who was a bit later, more 70s in France, which was a device that sent a rippling modulated magnetic field into a system. And he was getting great results with curing parasitic diseases with that and some anti-tumor effects. And that work got partly funded, but the funding stopped, kind of like Rife got largely funded and the funding stopped. And even before both of them, there was the work of Lakhovsky, who created what he called the multi-wave oscillator, which looked like concentric rings of frequency generators that created a complex field that also had healing and balancing effects. The answer to the question about frequency is that it's very complex, and there are many ways of using frequency.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, interesting questions that just came in light of all this from Rajendra, Todd, and that is how within this framework that we're discussing now of the psychosomatic context for disease, how do you understand COVID? What's happening in the psychosomatic membrane or organism of the human family right now that's a little virus like the coronavirus could spread worldwide and affect populations all over the world at the same time? What's going on as you understand it? What's going on?
That's a beautiful question and a very insightful one.
Thank you, Rajendra. That was a good question.
And before I give you the answer, which I have from the 2 pioneers in decoding that I spoke to you about, because I know the specific conflict of which I'm going to share with you. But I'm going to actually be a little Socratic and make you dig a little for it, because I think it'll be more instructive. And you really mentioned the key points, that this is a medical issue, but it's also a psycho-emotional issue. And the key characteristic, it's not just an isolated person or isolated community. It's something that appears to be affecting virtually every country, every culture, every disposition of belief. So if in the realm of psycho-emotional medicine, every condition in the body is the result of an unresolved emotional conflict, then the question is, well, what kind of conflict would be so prevalent that almost everyone in the world appeared to be susceptible to it? And if you want, I'll give you one or a few guesses, or I'll just tell you.
Well, let's ponder that for a moment, everyone. Dr. Ovokaitys is asking a very interesting question. So before you get the answer, I'd like everybody to ponder this question. At a psychosomatic level, what is it that is affecting the entire human race all at the same time? And I would add, Todd, repeatedly, there have been waves. Waves of it. And 18 months later, we're still in it. So think, everyone, just for a minute, what if you had to explain from a psychosomatic point of view why the human species has gotten COVID all at the same time worldwide? What would be your answer? Let me see if I can answer that. I would say from a psychosomatic point of view, what's happening in the world that could be contributive is I think that we're all under enhanced stress and uncertainty about our future in a way that has eroded our immune systems at the same time, because this stress now with globalization is globalized. So we're all experiencing at some level or another a stress factor on our beings, emanating out of the increasing political, economic, and ecological turbulence within which we find ourselves, and we're becoming uncertain of the future. Is that part of an answer? That would be my guess. Before you give us your guess.
I don't think mine's a guess.
Yeah. No, tell us. Then tell us. But that was my speculation.
It's excellent, and it's definitely in the right direction.
Oh, good.
And you have to go a little bit deeper and say, well, there's this big stress, but what is the source of the stress? Over what issue is there the stress?
What issue is at the stress?
And I think you're going to go, oh my God, when you hear it.
Tell us. Well, wait a minute. Let's think about this, everyone. Let's get into this. Let's not just take answers. Let's think. Repeat your question again. What is at the root of the stress?
What is the core psycho-emotional conflict that is giving rise to the COVID pandemic? So what is a widely held conflict that most of humanity experiences and has not resolved?
Would it be accumulated transgenerational trauma? Just the amount of trauma in the world?
It's a present moment conflict.
It's a present moment conflict. Present moment conflict. Would it be, if it's a present moment conflict, would it be just anxiety about well-being?
Nope. There's a cause for the anxiety.
Tell us.
And these are from the two leading pioneers that we bring to San Diego to do trainings in their incredible work.
Yeah.
So the first one, there's two different flavors of it, and they'll each make a lot of sense. The core one is this. And imagine, again, this is something that is almost universally shared by the global population. It is, I can't recognize who the enemy is.
Wow. Amazing.
And then another variation on that, because it is often the case with psycho-emotional medicine that the words really mean something, that someone's name or a derivation of the name, or even the name of the condition means something. So the other version of the core conflict is, I don't know who's wearing the crown, because corona, of course, means crown.
Say a little bit more about that. Who's wearing the crown?
So, in other words, just like you can't recognize or tell who the enemy is. So you're in the environment, you're looking out for your safety. You can't tell where the danger is coming from. Also, the flip side of that is I can't tell who's wearing the crown. I can't tell who's the authority. I can't tell who's in charge. I can't tell where this is coming from. And especially if the person who's wearing the crown is the source of the danger, then the two variations on the theme just give a little bit more explanation of that core conflict.
Yeah.
You don't know who's in charge, and you don't know who the enemy is. Who's in charge may be your friend, he may be the enemy, and you don't know that either.
I think that's it. I was sort of feeling into that by saying it's an anxiety about the future, but you're making it more profound. It's an anxiety about the present.
Right. Your present moment survival.
Your present moment survival. Wow, Todd, that's and everybody in the world in one way or another is caught up in that same anxiety.
Right. Unless they're not, and then they're not susceptible to COVID.
Gotcha. Well, I don't know very many people who would be outside that box of not knowing kind of not who the enemy is, but understanding where everything fits together, I think would be almost a deeper way to put it, both in terms of possible threat and also in terms of possible leadership or social stability that would enable us to understand more clearly what it is that's actually happening.
Right.
Wow. I love this. This is really good stuff. This is really good stuff.
Yeah.
So within that context, then the vaccines
right.
are how do you understand vaccines within the context of the psychosomatic reality in which we find ourselves?
Oh boy, I really want to tread carefully here. So
but I mean, and I don't want to get into the anti-vax, but I'm just trying to explore
so that our media doesn't get
has not been, because part of the challenge, Todd, as we know, is that the vaccines have not proved to be as effective as people thought in curing this, because they haven't gotten to the underlying psychosomatic issue out of which Corona-19 came.
You hit it right on the core issue. That's correct. That the actual resolution of the pandemic has to do with the collective resolution of the underlying psycho-emotional conflict, which is not really particularly being supported by the way the media and political leaders have been taking it. It's all been driven towards a particular type of medical solution, and I won't go into the scientific arguments. You can debate whether one type of preventive solution or another is ideal. And that would be for a panel of scientists to go into the depths of the immunology and virology. I have my own scientific opinions about it that I will steer clear of today to not be too controversial. And it's really more about the same underlying conflict. If you really look at it, I can't recognize who the enemy is. I don't know who's wearing the crown. It's really saying the same thing. I don't know who is in power. I don't know who's pulling the strings. I don't know who might be trying to undermine or hurt me that I'm not aware of. I don't know who's really for me. I don't know who's really against me. And all the issues around the vaccine simply aggravate all those questions. They're not solutions to those questions. So they're not really going to be solutions to the pandemic. And that's why it's not, from the psycho-emotional sense, why it's not as effective as people had hoped.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're saying something very deep that's well worth all of us contemplating, everyone, because it's easy to get caught into a kind of a lateral vax, anti-vax kind of a dialectic. But when you step back and really look at the psycho-emotional issues that are at play in our world, And, you know, if you add to that, Todd, the fact that, you know, with Code Red for Humanity and, you know, and everything that's happening with climate turbulence and the reality now that we humans are going into a phase of history where turbulence is going to become more frequent, more lethal, and more global. The very psychosomatic issues that have been responsible for COVID are only going to become more acute. Because the more you go into turbulence, by definition, the more confused you get about what the order of your world gets shaken more and more. So from a psychosomatic point of view, we're going to be going into some pretty rough waters.
Any stress will tend to aggravate all the psycho-emotional challenges.
Yeah.
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 And sometimes if it's a big enough stress, in the parlance of the system, it activates the biggest stress you've ever had. Even if it might not be metaphorically similar, which is usually the case. It may activate, because it feels like such a big stress, it activates the conflict over the biggest stress you've ever had. So that's the kind of dynamic that we're talking about. Raising big stresses, maybe bringing up the biggest stress people have ever had, even if it's not metaphorically the same. And I believe part of our role, why we're speaking today, is to create a counterbalance to that, that we can move into using the various tools, using the information, using the understanding that the way we think, eat, act, and feel literally changes our biology to that which is healthier, more youthful, more capable, more functional, more intelligent, and so forth. That to the degree that each of us individually do these things and support each other collectively, that is the counterbalance to create the kind of future that we'd really like to experience.
Well, you know, I think that's a beautiful, I think that's a good concluding point for our dialogue today, Todd. But I want to just see if I can understand it, because I think, you know, this is one of the things that people have appreciated about Humanity Rising in the midst of the pandemic. On a day-by-day basis, we've given structure, we've built community,
right?
You know, we've spread love, we've done heart coherence, and even though I wasn't thinking about it until right now, you know, 340 something sessions down the road, I realized that we've been providing in some ways an antidote.
Yes, you have.
To what's been going on, and that all of us in our families and in our communities and in our groups, to the degree to which, if I understand what you're saying, we can create coherence and we can create order and we can create a loving environment, that is really, from a psychosomatic point of view, the best antibody to COVID.
Yep. Yeah, and I think a flip side is, if you can recognize who your friends are, you feel more comfortable of knowing who they are, and it's easier to know who isn't on your side. And that is also an antidote to the conflict, which is what you're doing with building community, structure, consistency, place for people to get true information, which I really believe is one of the potential benefits we'll see on the other side of this, that there will be a yearning for people to really have information that's true, reliable, designed to be a benefit from them, and where to go for those sources. And you're being that kind of source.
Yeah. Well, Todd Ovokaitys, thank you so much. You've kind of blown my mind and led me to a deeper understanding of the world today. And I want to just acknowledge that. I just want to thank you for that, because I think all of us have been grappling at the depths of our soul to understand what on earth is going on here, and why won't it stop? And how do we really get out of this little pickle that we're in? And you've also enabled me to understand and appreciate more deeply why Humanity Rising has been so important to many, many people all over the world, and to me. I mean, I look forward to this every single day and talking to people like you and others that we bring on, and as we build community and share love and affection and affirmation on a day by day basis. I'm understanding now that we've actually been doing intuitively exactly what the doctor ordered.
Exactly.
Brilliant, beautiful. Any final words, Todd, that you'd like to share for us today?
I think really just a great pleasure being on, getting to share a little bit more. And I'm really pleased that for the first time in a format like this, I've been able to share that information about the underlying conflict around COVID. Because when I heard it like you, I thought, oh my God, that just makes so much sense. So
Yeah.
I'm glad there's finally been a platform and a venue where it was possible to really express it in a way that you could melt into it and get a deeper understanding from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good one.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Great pleasure.
Thank you, doctor. We may have you back down the trail for a further diagnosis of the collective world condition.
I would be delighted.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. That's our session for today. We'll see you tomorrow for a discussion on conflict resolution that is being developed in the country of Chile, which has had its share of turbulence and transformation. So that'll be tomorrow on Humanity Rising. All of you are welcome to our after chat. The link is in the chat box, and you're welcome to that. But Todd, brilliant, man. You're very good at what you do. Thank you so much.
Appreciate that. Always a pleasure. Till next time.
Thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow.